Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Terumot. We are up to Perek Vav, Mishnah Gimel. Today's Mishnah should be Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Aranbai ben Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov Minuchatam Migan Eden. Amen. We discussed in the previous Mishnayot regarding a person who ate Terumah unintentionally, b'shogeg. The Mishnah says that he has to pay back the principal of the Terumah that he ate to the Kohen, plus he has to pay a chomesh, a fifth of the total value as a penalty. Today's Mishnah is the introduction. We're going to explain that the obligation to pay the fifth is only imposed on someone who ate or otherwise consumed Terumah. If someone merely stole Terumah or damaged it, he must give the Kohen money to compensate him for his loss, but there's no obligation to pay with produce or to add the fifth. Today's Mishnah is going to deal with the case where one person stole Terumah and another person ate it. The Mishnah says, if one gives Terumah to his workers or to his guests who are not Kohanim for them to eat, Rabbi Meir says he pays the principal, the monetary value of the Terumah to the owner since he was the one who stole it, and they paid the fifth since they were the ones who ate it. And the Mefarshim explain that the Mishnah is referring to someone who is obligated to feed his workers or guests. For example, he promised his workers food as part of their wages, or he's an innkeeper who undertakes to provide meals to his guests. Since he's the one who stole the Terumah, he has to pay back the principal, the monetary value to the Kohen, and they, the guests or the workers who actually ate it, they paid the fifth. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. But the sages disagree. They say, Hem mishalim keren v'chomesh. They pay both the principal and the fifth. And he pays them the value of their meal. The Mefarshim explain, the workers or the guests must pay the principal and the fifth to the Kohen with tithe produce that becomes Terumah, and the employer or the innkeeper must pay them the value of the meal that he was required to provide. Now the Mefarshim explain, the Tosfot Yom Tov, quotes the Yerushalmi, that although he already served them one meal, he nevertheless has to give them money for another meal. And the Yerushalmi explains that once they realize that the food that they ate was forbidden, they will be so disgusted that it's worthless to them. Therefore, the employer or the innkeeper failed to meet his obligation to provide them with a meal, so he has to compensate them for its value. So it comes out, the Rav tells us that according to both Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim, the employer or the innkeeper pays the value of the food that was eaten, either according to Rabbi Meir to the Kohen, or according to the Chachamim to the workers or the guests. They also agree that the workers or the guests end up paying no more than the fifth, either because they had to pay only the fifth in the first place, according to Rabbi Meir, or because they had to pay both the principal and the fifth, but the employer or the innkeeper pays them back the principal, according to Chachamim. However, where do they disagree? They disagree about the exact amount the employer or innkeeper must pay. In general, we explained that Terumah is cheaper than ordinary food since only Kohanim can eat Terumah and since it's only eaten in restricted conditions, people pay less for it. So according to Rabbi Meir, the employer innkeeper pays the owner just a cheaper Terumah value of the food because he's compensating the Kohen for the property that he lost, which was Terumah. The sages, however, they disagree. They hold that the employer or innkeeper pays the full value of the food because he's obligated to provide his workers or guests with a regular meal and not one that consists of Terumah. That's the distinction between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim. That is in Rabotai Mishnah Gimel. Mishnah Daled now discusses situations where someone is liable for the sin of eating Terumah by mistake and also for committing another sin. And the Mishnah explains, Hagonev Terumah velo achalah. If someone stole Terumah from a Kohen but he did not eat it, Mishalem tashlumei kefel demei Terumah. He makes the double payment for having committed the sin of theft, meaning he returns the Terumah itself and he pays the monetary value of the Terumah. The Mefarshim explain that the Torah in Sefer Shemot, chapter 22, pasuk 3 says that a ganav, a person who steals secretly, must give back the item he stole or its value, and he also has to pay a sum of money that is equal to the value of the item that he stole. And on top of that, he pays the monetary value of the Terumah. Why? Since it was Terumah that he stole, the Mefarshim explain, he pays the lower Terumah value of the produce and not the value of the equivalent ordinary produce, which generally would be higher. Achala, If he stole terumah and ate it, mishalem shnei keramim v'chomesh. He pays 2 principals and the 5th, like this. Keren v'chomesh min hachulin. 1 principal and the 5th are paid with ordinary non-terumah produce because they are payment for the sin of eating terumah. The keren dmei terumah, and the 2nd principal can be paid with money worth the value of the terumah because it's the 2nd part of the double payment for stealing. Ganav terumat hekdesh v'achala. If someone stole terumah that is hekdesh, meaning it was donated to the Bet HaMikdash, to the temple, and he ate it, mishalem shnei chomashim bekeren. He pays the temple 2/5 and 1 principal. The Mefarshim explain, a Kohen was given terumah and then he donated to the Bet HaMikdash. Therefore, it has the sanctity of both hekdesh and terumah. It has the sanctity of both consecrated object and terumah. And since he stole it and ate it, he has to pay the temple 2/5 and 1 principal. In other words, what does that mean? The Mefarshim explain, he pays 1.5 times its value. For example, if he ate consecrated terumah, hekdesh terumah, worth 4 zuz, a 5th is 1 zuz, a quarter of the terumah's value. Therefore, principal and 2/5 would be 6 zuz. Now, he pays the principal and the chomesh, the one of the 5ths, with produce for the sin of eating terumah, and he pays the 2nd 5th with money for the sin of benefiting from hekdesh. And the Mefarshim explain that the Torah prohibits having benefit from property of the Bet HaMikdash. If a person benefits from the property of the Bet HaMikdash by mistake, he has to pay the value of the benefit plus a fine of a 5th, which is a quarter of the value, which is a 5th of the total amount. He also has to bring a offering called Asham Me'ilot. In the Mishnah's case, where somebody ate terumah that belongs to the Bet HaMikdash, he's obligated to pay 2/5. 1/5 for the sin of eating terumah by mistake, and another 5th for the sin of benefiting from the property of the Bet HaMikdash by mistake. He pays both 5ths to the Bet HaMikdash, meaning none of them goes to a Kohen. And we learn out from the Torah that a person who ate terumah gives a 5th to a Kohen only when he also pays the principal to the Kohen. But in our case, the Mefarshim explain, since he's paying the principal to the Bet HaMikdash, since the terumah belonged to the Bet HaMikdash, he also pays the 5th to the Bet HaMikdash as well. However, he doesn't have to pay a 2nd principal for the sin of stealing, Shen Begdish Tashumei Keved, because the Mishnah concludes, in the case of stealing Hekdesh, there is no obligation to make the double payment. And we learn this out from a pasuk in the Torah. The Rav explains where we get the source from. Yishalem Shnaim L'Re'eu, the pasuk says in Sefer Shemot, chapter 22, pasuk 8, you have to pay double to your friend and not to consecrated property of the temple. That is in Rabotai, today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen v'Amen.